Okay, what I want to try and show you guys is constructing what's called a jig for printing your block prints. The jig is very useful when it comes to lining up multiple prints off of the same block, multiple colors. All right, so a jig is very similar to a bench hook, but it performs a different task, and it consists of a base, which I've used an old piece of plywood here, and a couple of strips, which can be built up from wood, or you could use mat board, layers and layers of mat board. And actually what I had to do here, because my wood was a little bit thinner than my linoleum, was I had to actually build up with a layer of mat board, right, to reach the approximate height of my linoleum. So I've got a piece of wood, and underneath this blue tape I've also got a piece of mat board, right, which has brought the level of my jig, my right angle here, right, to slightly about half the thickness of a piece of mat board below the surface of my linoleum. So I had to bring it up, and right now you see I've got just about a fingernail's width of height difference, which is perfect. I want my block slightly higher, but very minimal, because when I place my paper down I want it to be relatively flush. Okay, this is helpful in so many ways on the press, but just as many ways off the press. Right? When we put this on the press and we're printing, right, this wood will keep your pressure uniform as it goes over, and it helps to prevent bowing your paper over the edge with the excess pressure. Okay, so I've constructed it. I've got my right angle here, and every time I go to print, right, my linoleum tucks up into that corner there, so it's always in the same place every time. Right? You want to sort of consider the width of your wood, right, has to be wider than the border you are going to have around your print, right? And so the setup for the registration is very similar to what we did for the stencils, right? So what I've done here is I've attached a piece of Mylar that I could draw on and that I could see, and it ends where my paper is going to end, and you can see I have my registration marks on here, right? And I have prepared all my papers beforehand, and I have marked the backs of my papers with my 3 registration marks, right? So once my block is inked, right, once my block is inked, I'm not going to actually physically ink it, right, but I've gotten my volume of ink on there. That will actually make it easier than what I'm demonstrating, because once you have the ink on there, the paper will stick to it, right? You'll lay the paper down, right? Your block is inked, and you will lay your block right inside your registration marks and flip it over, or, which is probably the better way to go, you're going to put your block in first and solely rely on your registration marks, which is how I advise going about it, if you're going for accuracy, right? So I've got my inked block. I'm going to angle my paper down just until it butts up against this guard. I'm going to line up my 2 registration marks. When I'm happy with that, I'm going to let my paper wash down over my plate, run my hand over it just to get that initial stick. Once I get that initial stick, I'm pretty safe to take my hands off it, right? And then I'm going to use whatever burnishing tool I'm going to use to print. You could use a Baron, right? This is one I got from a long time back, right? It's just a simple plastic Baron, very similar to what I showed you in class. Actually, it is exactly similar to what I showed you in class. Or I've got this little jammy here, which I really like. I actually found this in the bookbinding section. It's for creasing paper, but it works really well to develop a direct pressure edge that I can burnish my print, right? And once I'm done printing, lift it up, right? And I proceed with the next one, right? I can re-ink my block, line up my next paper, right? And print, rinse and repeat until I'm done. And then when I go in and I take my linoleum tool and I carve more into my image, I can then line up my next color exactly on top of my first color. Right? And my registration should be pretty spot on. If you got the hang of registering the multicolor stencils, which some of you did, some of you ran out of time before that happened, but that was ideal practice for this. But for right now, it's pretty simple, right? I trim my paper. The standard is to have a thinner border around these three edges and a little bit more on the bottom to compensate for your signature and the title and the numbering of your edition, right? So I pre-cut all my papers. I've pre-marked all the registration points, and from here on out, it's just inking, printing, inking, printing. When we print on either rice paper or a very smooth rag paper, right, it's important that it's smooth. Otherwise, without the pressure that you're getting from the press, it's going to be very hard to get a full volume of ink transferring. Right, so I'm going to take my smooth rag paper or my rice paper, and we print it dry, so we don't have to worry about it swelling up like we did with some of the stencils, right? So you don't have to worry about swell time and the moisture content of the paper, right? So printing dry, it's a very simple task. Right, so hopefully this was clear. Again, when we're building this up, we want it slightly lower than the top of our linoleum, right? Our linoleum always tucks into this corner, and our registration marks remain here for the duration of the printing. We never take them off. When we're done with this block, we create a new registration for the next piece of paper. If you wanted a larger border, you would just simply make wider tracks here on your 90-degree angle, thicker pieces of wood or cardboard or whatever it is you're doing. Right? This should help you tremendously when you're trying to build up those multicolor prints. I would advise doing it even if you're just doing a background. Right? Other